Imagine waking before sunrise because strangers are inside your home. Before sunrise, they will kill a queen, burn her body, and publish why. Rome used the same weapon 19 centuries earlier. Not thieves. Not rebels. Men carrying swords, moving through the residence as if they already own it. They cross the courtyard. They push past the guard. They enter the private rooms and begin searching for one woman. There is a problem. Most of them do not know what she looks like. So they seize court women, they drag them into the light, they demand names. Somewhere inside the palace, a queen is trying to disappear among her own attendants. Before morning she will be dead. Her body will be burned. And within hours a document will explain why she had brought this upon herself. This happened in Korea in 1895. But to understand why killing the queen was not enough, why her killers also needed a story about her, we have to begin with another queen, another empire, and another version of a woman almost everyone thinks they already know. Cleopatra. There is a Cleopatra you can summon without effort. Gold, perfume, a rolled carpet. A Roman general forgetting his duties because an irresistible woman entered the room. This Cleopatra is less a person than a spell from which Rome must wake. The image endured because it was useful. Cleopatra VII inherited a kingdom increasingly trapped inside Roman power. Egypt could crown monarchs, mint coins, and feed Mediterranean cities. But Rome increasingly decided whether a disputed crown remained on a disputed head. Cleopatra became ruler in 51 BCE. A dynastic struggle forced her out. Julius Caesar's intervention restored her. Cleopatra needed Roman power to survive a civil war. Caesar needed Egypt stable, indebted, and useful. Their relationship may have contained affection. It certainly contained politics. After Caesar's murder, the problem returned in a different form. Rome was again divided. Cleopatra aligned with Mark Antony, and together they tried to build a durable Eastern order around their children, their territories, and their combined authority. At Alexandria in 34 BCE, titles and kingdoms were publicly assigned to those children. To Cleopatra, this could look like a future, Egypt preserved through a family strong enough to negotiate with Rome. To Octavian, Antony's rival, it was perfect material. A Roman commander had been captured by an Eastern queen. Roman lands were being handed to foreign children. A civil war between Roman men could be retold as Rome defending itself from a woman. The trick was not to deny Cleopatra's power. The trick was to describe her power as contamination. And once you know that trick, another palace begins to come into view. More than 19 centuries later, Korea faced a different map with the same terrible geometry. Qing China pressed from one side. Japan was modernizing with astonishing speed. Russia moved through the north and toward warm water ports. Western powers arrived with treaties, missionaries, merchants, guns, and reassuring vocabulary for coercion. At the center sat King Gojong and his queen. She was born into the Yohungmin clan in 1851 and selected as queen in 1866. History now remembers her by a title awarded after her death, Empress Myeongseong. For now, she was Korea's queen. She was intelligent. She was politically active. She helped displace her father-in-law, the powerful Hyungseon Daewongun, and members of her Min clan gained offices and influence. This is where heroic retellings usually grow nervous. The Min network attracted real accusations, nepotism, corruption, office selling, rule by relatives. Myeongseong was not a powerless saint waiting to be martyred. She belonged to a court that could be predatory toward its own people, but corruption and conquest are not opposites. An empire does not wait for a neighboring government to become virtuous before deciding to dominate it. Myeongseong's political weapon was alignment, leaning toward one empire to hold another back. When one outside power became too strong, the court leaned toward another. China against Japan, Russia against Japan, foreign diplomats against domestic rivals. Not because any of these powers loved Korea, but because balance could purchase time. But for a state without the military strength to command its own neighborhood, diplomacy was not cowardice. Diplomacy was the remaining weapon. Cleopatra also understood this. She did not possess enough force to ignore Rome. Myeongseong did not possess enough force to ignore Japan. Each would later be blamed for using the only space left to her. After Actium, Horace wrote a victory poem. He called Cleopatra a deadly monster. A monster has no policy, only an appetite. Rome was not being asked to negotiate with Cleopatra, only to destroy her. Yet the poem does something strange near its end. Horace allows her courage. Cleopatra refuses to be carried through Rome as a captive. She chooses death rather than become an exhibit in Octavian's triumph. The monster becomes, for a moment, a queen again. Roman memory never solved the contradiction. Cleopatra had to be weak enough to humiliate, powerful enough to fear, and foreign enough to blame. The accusations around Myeongseong used different words. She interfered, she filled the court with relatives. She obstructed reform, she brought disorder into government. She manipulated the king. Some criticism reflected real court failures. But after her assassination, those charges acquired a second purpose. They could make the removal of a political obstacle sound like the removal of corruption itself. That distinction matters. The women do not need to be innocent for the stories about them to be useful. In fact, perfect innocence would make the propaganda less effective. The strongest political myth begins with something true, narrows the frame, and then claims the frame is the whole picture. And in Korea, the frame was about to close. In 1894, Japan went to war with Qing China. Japan won with a speed that shocked the region. Its influence over Korea expanded. Japanese-backed reformers entered government. The old political order appeared to be collapsing. Then Russia, Germany, and France intervened. They forced Japan to surrender part of what it had gained from China. The message to the Korean court was impossible to miss. Japan could be checked. Russia suddenly looked less like a distant danger and more like a counterweight, a stronger power that might restrain Japan. Pro-Russian figures gained ground. Japanese influence at court weakened. Myeongseong became associated with the attempt to draw Russia closer and push Japan back. From the Japanese legation, this did not look like clever balance. It looked like the loss of Korea. Muragoro arrived as Japanese minister. He was a soldier entering a diplomatic office at the moment diplomacy was failing. Before dawn on the 8th October 1895, the palace was attacked. Japanese soldiers, police and other personnel, civilian adventurers, and Korean collaborators entered Gyeongbokgung. They searched the royal quarters. They killed the queen. Her body was taken outside and burned. The woman did not merely vanish. The body had to become unrecognizable. The evidence had to become ash. The court had to wake into a world in which the queen was already gone. And then came the language. An edict appeared degrading her and accusing her of wickedness, interference, and disorder. Gyeongbokgung had refused to sign the document. Isabella Bird Bishop, the British traveller who had met the Queen, called it fraudulent and infamous. This sequence is almost too blunt to be symbolic. First destroy the body, then publish the explanation. First remove the political actor, then insist she had only ever been an obstacle. But this is where the two stories stop rhyming neatly. And that break is the most important part. Cleopatra and Myeongseong were not versions of the same woman. Cleopatra was a sovereign. She commanded resources, made dynastic claims, joined a war and lost. After Actium, Alexandria fell. She died while Octavian controlled her capital. The precise method remains uncertain. Myeongseong was a queen consort. She was killed inside her residence during peace on paper by men connected to the foreign power she was trying to hold back. Egypt became Roman territory in 30 BCE. Korea was not annexed in 1895. Japan's control deepened, but formal annexation came in 1910, 15 years later. If we flatten those differences, the braid becomes a trick. 2 dead queens, 2 empires, close enough. But the differences reveal the mechanism more clearly. Rome needed Cleopatra to carry the moral weight of a civil war. If Antony had simply lost to Octavian, then Rome had endured another struggle between ambitious Roman men. If Antony had been corrupted by a foreign queen, Octavian had saved Rome. In Korea, the story served a different process. Japan was not concluding a civil war, it was expanding control over another state. Japan could point to her court and say, Korea was broken. Intervention was necessary. Reform could not wait. Anyone who resisted was defending corruption. Different systems, different evidence, different crimes. The same narrative convenience. Make the woman explain the violence around her. Make her ambition explain the army. Could attention become the weapon power could not? Before the assassination, Isabella Bird sat with the Korean king and queen. Myeongseong spoke about Queen Victoria, a woman surrounded by wealth, power, royal children, and the apparent security of the world's largest empire. Then she asked, does she ever in her glory think of poor Korea? 9 months later, Bird returned. The Queen had been murdered. The king was, in Bird's words, practically a prisoner in his own palace. The question feels painfully naive now, as though being noticed by a powerful queen might protect a smaller country from powerful men. But it was not naivety. It was Myeongseong's foreign policy in a single sentence. If Korea could not command power, perhaps it could command attention. A trapped court survives by making one empire restrain another. Myeongseong tried Britain and Russia, Cleopatra tried rival Romans. For a time, both strategies bought room. Neither bought safety. Then the balance fails. And how does empire right that fall? Augustus left his own account of his achievements. It is carved in the language of completion, wars settled, peoples pacified, territories placed into order. Of Egypt he wrote only, Egypt I added to the empire of the Roman people. Zeros. Added. A kingdom becomes an addition. A war becomes a line on an imperial resume. This is what conquest does to scale. Up close there is a woman in a locked monument, deciding whether she will be displayed in Rome. Up close there is a woman in a palace trying to become indistinguishable from her attendants. From far enough away there is only territory. This is the point the two stories have been circling. Empires do not merely kill inconvenient queens. They turn the queen's attempts to survive into evidence that they deserve to fall. Cleopatra negotiates with Roman power, so she becomes the seductress who captured Rome. Myeongseong balances foreign powers, so she becomes the meddler whose intrigue endangered career. Their statecraft is rewritten as feminine corruption. Their vulnerability is rewritten as ambition. The violence done to them is rewritten as the restoration of order. Not because either woman was innocent, because innocence was never the requirement. The requirement was a story strong enough to make power look reluctant, and so we return to the palace before sunrise. Men are moving through the rooms, searching faces. They do not know precisely which woman is the queen. But the empire already knows what kind of woman it needs her to have been. By morning, the body will be ash. The story will survive.